Yeah, I published an article in the Skeptical Inquirer. The title was Why Bad Beliefs Don't Die. And my premise there is that a belief system is actually not designed to change by data. It's designed to be a long-range sensory system. Like you're sitting here. If you drove here, you have to believe your car's in the parking lot. You can't see it. So it's not designed to change because your car's not in the room. So my saying about that, the reason I did that was that skeptical people can get very demeaning of people with beliefs that are kind of screwy. And my point was, don't do that. Be compassionate. The beliefs have a hard time changing. It's very threatening. Boy, did I get hate mail over that article. I have never had such angry responses, but it was a lot of fun because they sent the author the responses, and then in the next edition you get to respond to the letters, and I got to be sarcastic and hostile and nasty and demeaning in my responses, and that was really fun. So, no, it was. You should read it. I was really very clever in terms of, you know. Oh, I got a nasty letter from one of the editors of Money Magazine in the thing, you know. Well, it wasn't too nasty. I mean, I like him, but anyway, shut up, Greg. So, okay, so what Sister and Paul and I are going to do today, you guys, is we're going to talk to you about what are called clinical conversations. Now, I want to warn you guys, some of you are likely to not going to like what I'm going to say, and here's why. The first principle, clinical principle, is that a clinical conversation is not an advocacy conversation. Here's why. Policy and personality work completely differently. An advocacy or policy conversation works by things like making a case, proving you're right, so if you're being interviewed on the news, having an advocacy conversation for life, absolutely. Make your case. Show them the sonograms, okay? Show them the pictures. Talk about what she was talking about in that wonderful session before this, about the pain. About 80% of people having post-abortion kinds of stuff. Tell them that. Make your case for it. And that is not how it works with a client. Because the principle clinically is, in personality, what is resisted persists. So in our work, resistance equals persistence. So if you find yourself talking the same way to a client that you talk to the news, you're in trouble. You want the outcome, yeah. But when it comes to working with personality, there's no other area in the universe where there's more irony, paradox, and contradiction than in personality. People have belief systems. I do, you do, right? Do people violate their belief systems? All the time. Do people do things that they think are wrong? Yeah, you bet. So advocating, making a case, proving you're right is not your best chance of getting someone to not have an abortion. Look, I'm a shrink. I work with personality disorders. I work with suicidal behaviors. Talking someone out of committing suicide doesn't work. Do I want my patients to kill themselves? Of course not. But advocating for staying alive, do you already not know they think the reasons to stay alive? That's not how you diminish suicidal behaviors. okay? So what I want you to get, what we're going to talk about today is your best chance of getting the outcome you're seeking, and that's not necessarily talking to encourage the outcome you're seeking. It might be, but not necessarily, okay? How many times have you changed your mind because of an argument? I've never had Rachel Maddow change my mind. I watch her just so that I can make fun of her in my head. Oh, don't write me angry letters. Hey, politically, I hate them all. I'm a libertarian. Did you know libertarians are pro-life? Did you know that? Oh, we are. We are the most staunch pro-life of all the political parties. See, people don't know that, libertarians. You know why? Because we believe in the Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, the first one of which is life. We are totally pre-life in the Libertarian Party. Yeah, I had dinner with the guy who started the Libertarian Party, David Nolan, in Colorado Springs. He's since passed away. Anyway, so we're going to talk about clinical conversations. So I want you to know that some of the ways we're going to tell you to talk are going to be different than you're going to talk in terms of your advocacy, okay? You know, I have my physical next Thursday at Dallas, and it's a big deal because they put you on the treadmill to exercise. It's terrible, so I dread it for months. In public health policy, in terms of public health, there is no evidence that doing more than monitoring your blood pressure and your lipids is worthwhile, okay? Well, this physical I have every year takes 6 hours, okay? They measure everything under the sun. And I asked my physician one time, I said, but the policy is you should only do those two things. He said, Greg, there's a very important difference between public health policy and personal health prevention. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Okay. So the group statistics are one thing, and then what you do individually is another. So the policy we have legally, ethically, morally in the world, yeah, that's one thing. And working with a client to get an outcome, that's a different thing. Okay? All right. So remember, there's irony, there's paradox, and there's contradiction in personality. And you'll have to work with that to get the best chance of getting the outcome that you're trying to get. Like, I want to keep my patients alive, not kill themselves. You want your clientele to not have abortions in order to have life? Outstanding. So what we're going to talk about are the ways you talk that enhance your ability to do that. Okay? You get the point? Yeah, good. Okay. Number 2. Clinically speaking, the meaning of a communication is the response. Most of the time in life, we assume the meaning of what we say is what we intend. Okay, I get that. Doesn't work clinically. Your point is to watch your client. And what response are you getting to what you're saying? See, this is why, like in marital therapy, why arguing doesn't work in marriages. Because when you argue, what's the response? What do? They argue back. Okay? So my arguing actually reinforces your arguing. Okay? So you have couples come in and they bitch that they argue. Yeah, well, if you're going to argue, they're going to argue back at you. Okay? So the first thing we have to do is have them get that the meaning of my arguing is your arguing. Okay? Now, arguing's not inherently wrong. I actually kind of like to do it sometimes, but in terms of what you're trying to get. So you don't want to pay attention to your intention. You don't want to pay attention to your meaning. You want to pay attention to what response you're getting from it. Okay? So, number 1, advocacy conversations are important and they have a place. I'm not an advocate. Okay? I'm a clinician. A clinical conversation is different. Policy works by logic, reason, making a case, proving you're right. Personality doesn't work that way. Freud found this out early on. When you confront a defense, it grows in your face. Okay? If someone tells you you're wrong, what do you want to do? Tell them you're right, they're wrong. Okay? So notice, that doesn't work. You know how I found Sister Paula? You know, I tell this story every year because I can remember it like it was yesterday. Do you know why I'm here? We were presenting a conference together, and she got up and she said, the reason the societal conversation about abortion isn't working is that it's entirely a defensive conversation. I thought, oh my God, she's right. You know, defense in a Freudian term. You know what a defensive conversation is? It is the conversation in the loser's locker room. How can you win a game with the conversation in the loser's locker room? You can't. I'm like, oh my God, she knows what she's talking about. I never heard anyone talk like that. A nun, especially, talk like Freudian terms, you know what I mean? So that's why I'm here. I still remember that. It was at Vicki Thorne's conference. You remember that? We were in Wisconsin. So, the meaning of the communication is the response, not your intention. Okay? Now, how are we doing here? I'm going to turn it over to her in a second here. I'm getting to personality disorders, okay? Well, we found number 3. The fundamental key to a successful life. Do you know what it's called? Flexibility and adaptability. Did you see the study that came out a couple years ago? This showed the single biggest correlate to success in life is the number of connections you have in your brain. Is life messy and unpredictable? Absolutely. Why do you think your clientele come to you? The pregnancy wasn't in their plan, was it? Well, guess what they have to be about that? Flexible and adaptive. That means they have to change their mind about their future, don't they? My wife has a very cute plaque. It says, life is all about how you handle plan B. Isn't that cute? She's so good. We have a plan B for everything. Now, we now have a plan B or for if an electromagnetic pulse takes down the power grid and I'm traveling, how I get home. I'm not kidding. I have survival stuff in my equipment back there. I got food, I got weapons. Don't worry, I don't have any guns. But I don't travel with guns, you know. No, the worst mistake of my life, I have odd hobbies. One of my hobbies, I'm a ham radio operator because it's service. We work with the Salvation Army and the Red Cross and do emergency communications, right? I dragged my wife to the ham radio conference in Keystone, Colorado last year, and made the terrible mistake of taking her to a session on electromagnetic pulse weapons. I should never have done that. An electromagnetic pulse is they detonate a nuclear bomb in the upper atmosphere and it takes out everything electrical. We know it works. In 1962, Starfish Prime at the Johnson Atoll in the Pacific, they detonated a nuclear bomb 242 miles in the upper atmosphere. You know what it did? 800 miles away, it blew out 800 streetlights in Honolulu. It exploded them. It destroyed all the microwave communication between the islands and ruined 6 satellites. So Pam's now convinced, since North Korea is planning it, we're going to all be taken down by that. So we have all this survival stuff because I took my wife to it. She's on the Federal EMP Commission now. She had to have an FBI background check. Oh, shut up, Greg. So the more flexibility and adaptability you have about your life, the better your life is going to be. Now, what you'll notice, what is the big thing personality disorder people are missing? Flexibility and adaptability. They have one way to be. And this is all they ever do with everybody all the time, everywhere, about everything. So you do not need to be diagnosticians and worry specifically about how do you diagnose one versus the other. We're going to talk about the different kinds and how you talk. What you need to worry about is that they don't have flexibility, they don't have adaptability, and they can't see life through possibilities and alternatives. They have a very rigid outlook, and you're talking into a system, in a human being that's limited. We can even see in their brains they are missing neurons. Did you know that? They don't have parts of their brains wired in that you have. You can think flexibly and adaptively. You can dance with life. They can't do it. So when you're talking to this clientele, you're talking to people whose resources for living are limited and deficient, okay? So We're going to talk about clinical conversations. They're going to have irony and paradox to them. They're going to have incongruity. It's not going to be like advocating. You got to pay attention to how they're responding, okay? And number 3, this is the toughest clientele because they're missing the flexibility and adaptability that you inherently have and expect in human beings, okay? It's not wrong to be self-righteous if you know what you're doing, but it doesn't work to be grandiose if you're a beginner. So narcissists have a terrible time starting things because they act like they know what they're doing all the time. They have no idea what they're doing. You know, being submissive is fine if, you know, like I said, if you're the private and the general gives you an order. But if you're in a cult and your leader tells you to kill yourself, you should probably decline. You know what I mean? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these and the limited nature of them and how you can talk with them in ways that can enhance the flexibility, adaptability, and get good results, like no abortion, in my case, no suicides, that kind of thing, okay? So Sister Paula's going to start with it, and she's going to start with, which one are you going to start with? The what? The histrionic. Oh, histrionics. Oh, God. She's going to do it because I can't stand them. They make me crazy, so she's really good with them. Okay, come tell them about histrionics. I don't mind most of these, but histrionics make me crazy.
I'm laughing because it is true. It is true they drive you nuts. In fact, that's one of the ways you know you've got a personality disorder, because they drive you nuts. You think, how are you feeling about your client? Okay, I'm going to describe 2 of them. One was a man and one is a woman. I'm trying to do this real quick. Then I'm going to go through their characteristics, how they got that way, and what you do and what you don't do. Okay, I once knew a man in the pro-life movement many years ago, was a worker in the pro-life movement. Charming guy, really nice. Everybody liked him. He was really, really good, hard worker, except he kept doing very emotional things that weren't real judgmentally good and stuff. So I kind of moved him out of working with me a little closer. But I knew his background had been, he had gotten a girl pregnant some years before, and she had had an abortion. And he was devastated by that. He was very, very upset about that and knew it was a terrible mistake and it would never happen again, and went through all the classes and learned everything and was so grateful for that. He was so upset about that woman having the abortion, his child. So he was helping, but his judgments weren't real good, so I kind of filtered him out a little bit. And maybe a little while after that, he called me, and he was really upset because somebody else had gotten pregnant. I said, "You mean you got somebody else pregnant?" "Yeah, I got somebody else pregnant." And she had an abortion. He was devastated, absolutely devastated, so upset and didn't know what to do and so on. And so we talked about it, got him back to church and everything. And you know, he didn't exactly know how it happened. I mean, he couldn't tell me. It was something that just happened, and he was really upset about it. Stop laughing, Dr. Lester. Anyway, we just couldn't backtrack. We couldn't backtrack at what all happened. So then time passed, probably 4 or 5 years, literally. And I saw him again. I said, "Hey, so-and-so, how's it going?" He said, "My life is going really well." And then I met this girl, and I got her pregnant, and she had an abortion. I said, "You're kidding." And he was devastated again, crying. I mean, literally crying, upset, etc. And how did this happen? What happened? I don't know. It just happened. You know, these things just happen. I don't know how it happened. Personality disorder. Okay. Another example. This was very early on in my career. This young woman, I was working in an adoption agency. This young woman was trying to decide whether she was going to place her baby for adoption. But when she came in, she was so upset about all the stuff that was going on in her family and all the upset that was going here. So we spent the first interview trying to figure out how she was going to handle her alcoholic father and how she could clear her mind so she could even think about the adoption. And everything was upset. So I thought, I'll calm her down. I'm a very calm person. I'll calm her down. So we'll talk about things. So we talked about how to handle things and so on. And then she came in for the next interview. And she had handled the last thing that we talked about, but then we talked about the other uncle and the aunt and such, and everything was another problem. And it was all upset there, and so we talked about that and calming her down. I couldn't get her focused, she was just, so then after that, she came in a third time, and again we handled another upset. I mean, it's like our whole family was upset. It was just a mess. And when she left, I said, I've got to do a case study here. So I took out my notes, and I couldn't write down how that girl felt. All I knew was that she was upset. I couldn't tell you whether she was jealous, whether she was angry, or whether she felt. I couldn't tell you how she felt. And I knew that I had just missed her completely. And I also knew that I didn't want to talk to her again. And then the other thing that made me think about it is she said I had sent her to Dr. So-and-so, who was one of our reliable doctors, to get a workup. And she came back and she said, oh my God, it was a terrible experience. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, it was the way he examined me. And I said, well, how did he examine you? And she said, oh, it was just awful. It was so awful. I just felt creepy. He was just creepy. I said, he was? Dr. So-and-so? She said, yes. He said, it was awful. What did he do? Well, it was just the way he did it. And when he looked at me, it was just awful the way he did it. So I couldn't get anything much more specific than that. And then the following week that she came, or a couple weeks later, she had gone to her school. And she was in the front row of her school, her lecture, and the professor came along. And as she was sitting there, he walked along besides everybody in the front row and looked down their dress. Of course, she was leaning over, she said, and he looked down her dress. It was awful. At that point, I said, histrionic personality disorder. That did it. Okay, let's talk about, those are two examples. Let's talk about histrionic personality disorder. They are a dependent personality disorder. They're one of the two dependent personality disorders, which means that they rely on other people. They need other people to give them attention. They are attention getters. They know how to get attention, and they rely on other people for protection and for the rewards of life and for their self-image. Other people are necessary. Consequently, they're very sociable. You like them. They're good in parties. They're lively. They're fun. You like histrionic personalities. You really do. They require a lot of attention and a lot of affection. And at first glance, they seem to express their thoughts and feelings with great ease. They have a flair for the dramatic, and they draw attention to themselves. But it's a kind of a short-lived capriciousness. They're very intolerant of frustration, and they're also very sexually provocative. But you know what? They don't know it. They genuinely don't know it. They're also not very good in bed. They're not very good lovers. But they're very provocative. And they have no idea that they are. They really don't. What is their self-description? They describe themselves as very sociable, but they cannot admit any kind of inner turmoil. They can say they're upset, but any kind of weakness or depression or hostility or anything like that, they can't really admit because they don't know they have it. They avoid introspection. They avoid thinking about themselves. They're always out there with something else, somewhere else, depending on you to give them attention and affection and image. They do not know how they feel. That's how I didn't know how she felt, because it's all out there. They seek approval, stimulation, and attention. Now, how do they get that way? What's the etiology? Now, Dr. Lester talked about how much is biological. They were probably a constitutionally alert baby, an alert baby. And they relied on external stimulation when they were babies. They were probably bright and alert and looking at things. And they may have had many different caretakers. And they provided them with immediate satisfaction, immediate attention. And they may have learned very young that getting attention depended on looking pretty and doing things and doing things that caused attention. They may have had parents who gave them minimal negative reinforcement. Minimal negative reinforcement. They rarely punished them, and they distributed rewards for what they addressed as being pretty and doing well. So they may have done very well in school too. But they failed to reward the child when the child behaved normally. So it created a personality that demands attention, seeks attention, and is self into themselves. Now, probably the parents themselves were histrionic. Probably both parents, or at least one. So can you imagine a family with a histrionic parent and histrionic child, how everything was stirred up all the time in the family? There was always an activity, something was, molehills were mountains. Everything was stirred up, and nothing was quite right ever. They also do not learn from mistakes. They repeat the same mistakes over and over and over because they simply don't learn. Like my friend with getting 3 women pregnant and then not knowing how it happened. They don't introspect. What is the prognosis on this group? Actually, it's reasonably good. It's one of the better ones of all of the personality disorders. The prognosis is better because they possess motivation and they possess skills to maintain relationships, which is not true of all the personality disorders. They rarely seek therapy. Rarely seek therapy because they don't need it. They don't have a problem. They only seek therapy if there's a period of social disapproval, like if their parent or their wife is upset with them, which she probably will be after a while. But they're never responsible. This is why possibly the only chance they're going to get help is in a crisis setting with us as the helpers in a crisis setting. So it has to be short-lived and it has to be in a crisis. So you have to help them make a good decision at a time of crisis. This group does well in a group because they can't identify their feelings. But if they can be with a group of other women and they're talking about what it means to be an unwed mother, or what it means to have this baby, or how it means to handle a baby right now, they can listen to other people express those feelings, and it helps them to get in touch with how they're feeling and ways of doing things. They do respond to training. You do it this way, you do it that way, you have to do this with your baby, you have to do that, because they seek that because it doesn't come that way naturally. You do not put them in a sheltering home. I don't know how many of you have sheltering homes where you've got somebody who needs a place to stay and so on, so you put them with a nice family, a nice ProLife family, and they stay for, during the pregnancy or whatever. You do not place them in sheltering homes, because I guarantee before very long, a loving father of a sheltering home will be misunderstood. And you don't want to put a family through that. I wish I could think of some examples of that. Do you remember Clarence Thomas? Do you remember the Clarence Thomas case? Now, it's not professional to diagnose somebody when you've never seen them or anything, but do you remember the woman that accused Clarence Thomas of all kinds of sexual stuff? And none of the other women in his group could think of anything that he did, and couldn't think of anything. And in fact, one of the women had the courage to say, she's kind of provocative herself. I don't think, couldn't imagine what he did anything. At that time that he was going before the hearings, before he was accepted as Supreme Court Justice, one of the women in my volunteer group that lived with me had come from Washington to spend a year in Los Angeles. They were friends of the Thomas family, and she was absolutely horrified by that situation because she knew him as such a distinguished and wonderful man. And there was absolutely nothing that could be done. I can't remember the woman's name, but she became very famous in the women's movement for standing up for women's rights and against men who were predatory men. So you have to be careful about that and kind of placing each other. They will do well in a group, but they have to be with a good group leader. Otherwise, they'll take over the group. They will respond to you. And actually, they'll follow your suggestions. They really will. In fact, you have to give them suggestions. You have to direct them. This is a group that you have to be directive with. You have to tell them what to do, and they will do it. Remember, this is a dependent personality type. She will do what you want, and you have to direct her in a positive kind of way. She will need help from other people to go through and have that baby, because you have to pay attention to who she's getting attention from her boyfriend, from the guy who got her pregnant, and so on. So you want to get her involved with people, with her family or other people that are going to support her. You have to provide it, and you have to see her regularly, so that she becomes more dependent on you temporarily. I mean, you're not going to see her on a long-term basis, but she's going to need support, and she will follow through. And like my friend, the gentleman, she will accept what you say about the life of the baby, and she'll very badly if she has a baby. She really will afterwards. If she has an abortion, I mean, she'll feel very badly afterwards. So this is a woman that needs direction. She needs direct statements. She doesn't need a lot of non-directive stuff. She needs your support, and you need to be careful with her. Okay. Do you have anything else to add? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, you guys got to change it. There we go. Thanks. So I want you to notice a couple of things. As Sister Paula said so effectively, number one, notice personality disordered people live a one thing led to another life. Third pregnancy, I don't know how it happened. Really? Kamikaze sperm flying down the hallway? I mean, really, you think she's making this up? These people really do say, gee, it's the third woman I've gotten pregnant. I don't know how it happened. Seriously? See, we used to think they were psychotic because their disconnect from reality is so profound, but now we know it's not that they misperceive reality, it's they overlook reality. So notice this guy was blah, 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 oh God, pregnant, blah, 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 oh God, pregnant, blah, 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 oh God, pregnant. So notice that, okay? Notice an example of the woman she gave. Uncomfortable, blah, 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 uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. Well, is it, like she said, jealousy? Is it anger? Is it blah, 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 uncomfortable, blah, 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 uncomfortable, okay? Notice number 3, what Sister Paula taught you there was the way you get, with this population, get flexibility and adaptability is they're open to suggestions. So notice she said, you can make suggestions and they'll do it. You get the response. Do this with your baby, and they do it. Okay, good. Then tell them what to do. There are other people you tell what to do, they won't do it. But this population will. So notice, she just taught you that. She taught you that, yeah, make suggestions, give them advice, tell them what to do. They'll do it because they're dependent enough to listen and to need somebody to tell them what to do. They're needy in that sense. So notice that she just taught you about somebody who is limited, has a repetitive style of doing things that doesn't work out well, and a clinical conversation with them has to do with suggestions and advice. Group works with them because they get all these different inputs. What do you think the value of a group is, you guys? You get all kinds of different ideas, all kinds of different possibilities. So notice that she told you very effectively when you've got somebody who's very theatrical, very needy, very showy, etc. Oh, okay. Well, they're kind of limited to that, and they live a one thing led to another life. Okay, well, we need to make some distinctions about what the discomfort is, and then let's make some suggestions about what to do with that. See how that works? Yeah. So that was, she's very good with them. I'm not. The thing I don't like about histrionics is they have conniption fits. We call them hissy fits. Where'd you think the name hissy fit came from? They're brats, they throw temper tantrums, Pam and I have this couple we used to hang with, and it was always stressful to me because the wife is histrionic disordered, and she's embarrassing. She's loud, she's obnoxious, she never shuts up. She undresses herself in public, metaphorically speaking. But they were fun, so I tolerated it because we'd go, play miniature golf and ski and have fun. And then she had a hissy fit in the middle of a ski lodge, stomped her feet, shook her fist, screamed and yelled, shrieked and cried, and I said, that's it. No more. And then Pam told me last week, oh, by the way, she's spending the night at our house Sunday night. Okay, I'm out of here. Okay, so the good thing about them, like Sister Paula was saying, is that you can do pretty straightforward suggestions, advice. Yeah, so you can do that as well. What are you gonna do next? You're gonna do the dependent, what do you want to do? You're gonna do dependent next. So I'm gonna leave that for her because she's gonna do that one. Okay, so some of the other ones don't respond that well to advice and to suggestions. You don't get the response. So you're going to do dependent. I'm going to, what I'm going to do? I'm going to lump some of these together because you guys aren't going to be diagnosticians. Okay. So I'm going to take this off so I can use it again. Hang on, you guys. Sorry. Just give me 1 sec here. Whee. Okay. So, okay, so in practical terms, what flexibility and adaptability look like, the name we give it is problem solving. Okay? Life throws us things we don't expect, and we experience those as a problem. And let's face it, unwanted pregnancy is considered a problem. Why do you think the girl comes to you, right? Okay? Now, I know it may be uncomfortable for you to think of a life as being a problem, but that's how it's experienced. And so what you're going to want to do is you want to engage in general, this is a problem-solving process to come up with good solutions for handling what life's thrown at you, right? And as Sister Paula said, if you've got somebody very showy, very needy, very adaptive, very kind of seductive, the histrionic, okay, one of the ways you can problem solve with them is make suggestions. Okay, one of the ways you can problem solve with them is put them in a group where they get advice from people. Yeah, that's very good. That's very nice. So that can work with that. So think of this as a problem-solving process, okay? In fact, you want the best example I've ever seen of that? My wife's a sci-fi nut. Drags me off all these sci-fi movies. She dragged me off to one last year that was so good, I've watched it 6 times on cable. It's called The Martian. It's about a man who's stranded on Mars and how he problem solves to survive. And the movie was directed by Ridley Scott, my favorite director. It's from the book. I read the book too, because Pam had that. Matt Damon, who I don't even like, plays Mark Watney, who's an astronaut accidentally stranded on Mars. And it's how he problem solves to survive. And he comes back to Earth, and it doesn't hurt the movie to know that. And Ridley Scott adds a scene at the end of the movie to conceptualize what it was about. It's not in the book. Matt Damon walks into NASA, into a classroom with a group of young adults who want to be astronauts, like you guys. And he walks in and he says, so here's the question I get asked. When I was stranded up there by myself, did I think I was going to die? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And you better get used to it because it's going to happen to you. This is space. It does not cooperate. At some point, it's all going to go south on you, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. And here's what you do. You either surrender to that, or you do the math, you get to work, and you solve a problem. And when you solve that problem, you solve another problem. And when that's solved, you solve another one. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And you watch him. What's his problem? Food. How's he going to eat? It's a barren planet. He's a botanist. He figures out food. That's done. Now I got to communicate with NASA. How do I do that? Oh, I figured out how to do that. Okay, that's done. Now I got to get to where they can rescue me. How can we get across the planet to get there? Okay, that's done. Problem solve, problem solve, problem solve. And the problem with personality disordered people is they don't problem solve. How can that man, the Sister Paula so effectively presented, problem solve, oh my God, she got pregnant? Okay, how are you going to prevent that next time? Well, if it's, oh my God, one thing led to another, there's no way to prevent it. So the key to the whole thing here, you guys, is that personality disordered people are lousy problem solvers. John Lively says, a personality disorder is a human being who persists in a behavior in the face of clear evidence it's inappropriate and ongoing bad consequences. Len Sperry's definition of a personality disorder is that it's a human being with a profound deficiency in their ability to problem solve. So one of the things that we do in this psychiatric world is we look at how to induce problem solving when they're limited and keep doing one thing over and over again. And what Sister Paula told you, with somebody who's histrionic and theatrical, needy and showy, you put them in a group, you give them advice, you make suggestions, because they can listen because they're dependent. Now the problem with some of them, she'll talk to you about it in a minute, with dependent dependence is they'll do everything everyone says. So what you say won't stick. Nevertheless, you got a problem, you solve it. Okay, so with the other ones who are resistive, look, a paranoid suspicious of you, they're not going to listen to you any more than listen to anybody else. You're going to tell them something, they're going to think you have an ulterior motive, you know what I mean? And schizoids just don't care. And schizotypals are just going to be weird, you know? Antisocials are just trying to figure out how to steal your car. Borderline is going to just scream at you. Narcissists, they know better than you do. Avoidance are just never going to show up. She's going to talk about dependence. And obsessive compulsives are going to tell you the things on your wall are crooked. You know, your picture needs to be straightened. You know what I mean? So, a problem-solving process has these parts. Number one, identify a problem. That's not a problem for you guys, because nobody comes to you without having identified the problem. Pregnancy, right? Okay? Now, I'm sorry I'm calling it a problem, but that's how they experience it. Number two, create possible alternative solutions. Oops. Oh, that's not good. Oh, there it is. I stepped on it. Okay. Number three, evaluate the solutions. Pros and cons. Number four, choose and implement a solution. Number five, evaluate the outcome and make refinements to it, to adjust it. Okay, and so what you find in the personality disorders are different ones of them don't do a step here. See, in Sister Paula's a good example of the histrionic. They've identified a problem being pregnant. They can't come up with alternative solutions. So you put them in a group and people can give them suggestions. You give them ideas. And then they're willing to implement. So their stuck spot's here. So that's easy to work with. But you get an obsessive compulsive, they can come up with 1,000 alternatives, but they'll never choose one. They'll just go over them and over 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 and over. I could do this, I could do that. Well, maybe I should do this. Or I think maybe that would be good. But the problem with this is, no, there's a problem with that. Well, I think maybe this, maybe that. So get them to actually do anything. This is your stuck spot. This is where you're going to have to coerce them into actually taking action on something rather than endlessly thinking it. A narcissist won't evaluate. They put every solution down. No, that won't work. No, that won't work. No, that's not going to work. No, this isn't going to work. Why are you suggesting that? I've tried that 3 times. That's no good. Why are you saying that? That's stupid. I can't believe you're telling me that. You're an idiot. Can I see you again this week? You know? That's what borderlines do. They're like, I hate you. Can I call you on the phone this afternoon? You don't know what you're doing. Will you see me twice this week? You're the biggest idiot I ever saw, and I have to talk to you again. You know, it's like, what? Irony, paradox, and contradiction run personality. okay? So what you're doing with all of them is you're trying to get this. And as I like to say, listen, no one who has clear problem solving would have an abortion, because the downside of that solution is so severe compared to other possible solutions. So you got to get, there's a glitch in people's problem solving who end up choosing that alternative. Now, okay, I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to turn it back over to her. The reason I went over this is I'm lumping a bunch of the other ones into this so that you can see at some point they get stuck in the process. I'm not going to, she's going to do the ones she's talking about the ones you see kind of the most because she knows your specific population. And I'm just a garden variety shrink, so I see all kinds of other stuff. So I'm lumping the ones that don't listen kind of in that way into here so you can see this is the process you're trying to engage in, okay? And they're going to get stuck in one of these spots. So let me say one last thing, and then I'm going to turn it back over to her for the next part. Here's something that's going to be hard for you, okay? When you're doing problem solving with someone, and you're listening for where they're stuck, one of the things that you're going to have to do in order for this is how you want it to work. What we found, as long as you're engaged in a problem-solving process, your life's going to work out. And once you don't, you end up in what's called drama. And I do a whole thing in my training about drama versus problem-solving, and all these different categories create different kinds of dramas. This is a retaliatory drama, et cetera. So where they get stuck is where you want to address it. Now, the one I want to talk about with the other ones is evaluating solutions. You have to get them fluid in this process. Keep problem solving, just like the Martian. Problem solve, problem solve, problem solve. Where people get stuck is on a solution because they see the upside of it and the downside of all the other ones. Okay? And I'm sorry. I'm going to say this, okay? Is there an upside to having an abortion? Absolutely. You don't have to change your mind about your future, do you? You don't have to be worried about someone else. I mean, there's an advantage to that. Is it worth it? Of course not. Am I saying that makes it fine? Of course not. But you guys, if you're not willing to acknowledge the benefit of every possible solution, you will stick them. And you have to look at the downside of all the ones they're not seeing the downside of. Is there a downside to having an abortion? Oh, you betcha. Is there a downside to having a child? Yeah. If that's not your view of life, it's not what you expected, the downside is you have to change your mind about it. Hey, is there an upside to killing yourself? Absolutely. You don't feel this bad anymore. Well, I think. You know how I blackmail suicidal patients? How? I say, you do know the reason you want to kill yourself is you think once you're dead you'll feel better. What if you don't? What if you feel just like this after you're dead? Show me the data you're using to show you feel better when you're dead. Oh, you don't have any? And you're going to take that chance? Doesn't that seem a little stupid? And then I say, and I want you to remember, if you kill yourself, treatment won't work. I say that with a straight face. They go, I never thought of that. But do I have to acknowledge that there's a benefit to killing yourself? Yeah, because if I don't, what's going to happen? They're going to argue that there is, and I mean that there's not. And they're going to argue that there is, and I'm going to argue that there's not. But if I say, yeah, I get it, I wouldn't want to live like this either. We got better solutions than that. Yeah, having a child. Listen, I was a child. I was a pain in the neck. When I became an adult, I apologized to my parents about what I was like as a teenager. I did. I said, I get it now. I'm sorry. Then I made a mistake. I said, you want to hear all the stuff I got away with? Oh, I should never have done that. I didn't know my parents could turn those colors, you know? So you guys, when you're involved in a problem-solving process with somebody who's really resistive, somebody who thinks you're an idiot, somebody who is not going to follow instructions or rules, you've got to be willing to say, yeah, I can get why you want to do that. There's an upside to that, yeah. And there's a downside to this other one. But there's also a downside to that, what you're thinking about. You're aware of that one, right? Yeah, good. And there's an upside to this other one you're not thinking about? The benefit to this is that. See how different this is from an advocacy conversation? A political, legal, or advocacy conversation, you never give an inch. You never acknowledge one positive thing about the opposite side. Never, ever, ever do you give them credence for anything except malevolence and death, disaster, destruction, and the end of life as we know it. You don't have that in a clinical conversation. Okay, so no, Sister Paula didn't tell you that with the histrionic to advocate, to come on push. She said make suggestions. Give some advice, put them in a group, okay? So, what I want to tell you about the resistive ones is one of the important things to keep them into this process is for you to be willing to acknowledge the pros and cons of every alternative of handling things. Do I want my patients to kill themselves? No. I've had 2 suicides. I don't want more. But does it stop suicide by saying there's no upside to it? No. Okay? Okay, good. So, let me turn it back over to Sister Paula, who's going to get back to the specifics of some of the major clients you see, which are dependents, and that's why they ended up in the situation they're in, seeing you. Okay, get up here.
Okay, this one's a little bit more difficult because in a sense, we see many women that come to us dependent sounding, don't we? We really do. In fact, we scratch our heads and say, my God, what happened to the women's liberation movement, you know? Dependent personalities have a marked need for social approval and affection, and a marked willingness to live in accordance with the desires of other people, markedly. The center of gravity is not themselves, it's other people. They live according to how other people want them to live. And they avoid asserting themselves. They don't want to be seen as aggressive. They adapt their behavior to please whoever it is they're dependent on. And they are exceedingly sensitive to criticism and disapproval, so they avoid it. They do anything to avoid criticism. Their self-esteem is dependent on the encouragement of other people. They arrange their lives to ensure a constant supply of nourishment and encouragement. They are self-effacing, agreeable, and they search for support. They subordinate their desires to other people, and they will submit to abuse and intimidation to avoid isolation. Now, if you could open up this woman's head and you could break it open, you looked inside of it, you would see her image of herself as a little bitty little thing in there. And you would see her image of everybody else as big and tall and wise and powerful and knowledgeable and much smarter than she is, much better than she is. So she's little and everybody else is more knowledgeable and better than she is. So she really has to depend on them because she's not big in her eyes. They tend to evoke sympathy and attention from other people, and they tend to be very sweet and Pollyannish in interpersonal strain. They're terrified of their own hostile or angry feelings because they're afraid it might endanger their security, so they put them down. So any feelings of anger or hostility or whether they just put down, out of place, because they might endanger their dependence on somebody else. They don't want their persons getting mad at them. They don't want you getting mad at them, so that they won't offend you, or they won't do anything that you don't want them to do. They'll be very careful about that. They're very satisfying at first to have as clients. You love them because they love you, and they're doing everything they can to please you. And they think you're wonderful. And they'll present their problems to you. And they just think you're the best counselor they ever had, have the best suggestions. They know how to please people. They've spent their life doing that. So they will please you. And you will suggest, you will give them all the reasons not to have an abortion. And they'll say, that's right, that's true. And they'll believe it. And they do have sympathy for their baby. They will have that. They will believe that. And they will have feeling for their baby. Then they'll go out and they'll talk to their boyfriend or their mother, or whoever is the person that they're most dependent on, whoever is the biggest image in their head, and they'll tell them that nice lady in there said I could have the baby, and we could do this and this and this, and their boyfriend will say, oh, honey, you don't want to do that. It's much better to have an abortion because of this, this, and this, so we'll just go ahead and have the abortion. And they'll say, okay, and that's it. And they may suffer post-abortion guilt after. They may suffer that. Because they will listen to what you say. But they will do what the person that they are dependent on does. So one of the key things that you have to realize in counseling a dependent woman is that you have to talk to the decision maker. And she is not the decision maker. So I noticed that some of the service centers there's kind of a pattern. We talk to the woman and not the man. And there's always two people involved in the decision. Because even women come in who are not necessarily totally dependent. They don't have a lifelong pattern of dependency. But temporarily they're young and they're in their first relationship and they want to please the guy and they're going to do what he wants and they're going to submerge their own attitudes. They may not be a dependent personality, but it may be a situational kind of thing where their desire is, I have to please him. I have to have the abortion for his sake because I will lose him. And what am I then? I've had my first sexual experience. I'm dependent on him. I have to have the abortion. So it's very important to have the guy in and talk to him also. And if you sense that this is a lifelong pattern of dependency with the woman, you may not always know that on the first interview. But it's very important to be sure that she comes in, she has him come in, invite him in, or meet them at a coffee shop or something or other. But get them together because he will be the one who will decide, or her mother will be the one who will decide about the abortion. And with guys, you can talk to them, say, well, you can't do a girl, give them all the reasons. Guys are there, want to be protective of the girlfriend. And, women like this can get very involved with a horrible guy who will beat them or do all kinds of bad things with them because she's dependent. She'll take anything. She'll allow herself to be hit and then come back because he'll say he's sorry the next time. And she'll explain that, he didn't really mean it. And remember, they have a Pollyanna attitude. Everything can be made okay. So he may be hitting her, but she'll still go back to him. So he's the one that's the decision maker. But you can't assume that that's how he is. He could also be a pretty nice guy who got this really nice girl, and she's really affectionate with him, and she likes him a lot, and she does everything he says, and that's really flattering. And he thinks, wow, this is the perfect wife. And he may now get her pregnant. Now, all of a sudden, he's starting to notice that she's kind of dependent on him. And that's very wearing. The person is very, very wearing. And after a while, he'll be saying to you, well, I thought she'd make some decision about where she wanted to go, but she didn't. I have to decide where to go. I have to decide what to do. I have to decide where, blah, 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 blah. And it may be wearing on him. And now she's saying she's pregnant. Now he's faced with having her and a baby. It may be just too much for him. So you need to get him in and talk with him and find out how he feels and talk with him separate from her. Separate from her. Because he can't afford to be less strong in front of her. So when you're doing this you can talk to them together, yes, but be sure you talk to him individually. How is this going for you? How's the relationship going for you? Ask the same questions you would ask of the girl and be very supportive of him. Because if you convince him to have the baby, He has to be convinced to support that baby and support her, or pull the mother in again and get them involved again. You know, you have to see, she's going to be dependent on somebody. So what are your options? What are your planning? How do you plan for this family? But involve him and the mother and everybody else. Don't just talk to the girl. And that's true of many of your cases, because even a lot of the cases where the woman appears, where she's in first experiences, this is her first experience of pregnancy and sex and everything else, she can be pretty dependent. Not personality disorder dependent, but she could be blocked out about what she's thinking and how she's thinking. Now, this is another case where you have to be very directive with her. Very, very directive, because she will do exactly what you say. And she'll report back to you, because that's what she does. That's her whole life pattern. So be directive, but call in the people that she's dependent on, or else she can't make the relationship. I can give you an example. I once had a woman that I dealt with for 2 years, very dependent, and the guy kept doing these horrible things with her. Couldn't get her to move out. Finally, the family stepped in, and she moved in with the family, and that was the only way she was able to get away from him. So you have to provide something else. This personality disorder is also one of the amenable for progress, because she also possesses an ability to relate to you. And if you can get her working, get her feeling independent, getting some money, get her to make a little independent, get her own job, get her own house, get her own apartment, get her own whatever, maybe have the baby, start getting into support groups to have it for mothers and so on, she will grow. She will grow. If she's in the right setting, she will progress. She may not be a most assertive person, but she will be able to manage with help if you can provide that for her. And I think I'm out of time. And thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Thank you. God bless you all.
Rise and build, servants of Adonai, bend your backs, for our Lord is worthy. Brick by brick, we are called to serve, work with purpose.